Our friend Andy McCarthy joins us. He is at National Review, a Fox News contributor, former federal prosecutor, and he is in Chicago right now watching his son play baseball. So I'm sure Clay is going to have some baseball-related questions for you, or little league questions, Andy. But if I can, and thank you for being with us. If I can
My
start with
pleasure.
$83 million judgment against Trump. We kind of want you to give us your top line on that, and then we'll get to some of these other legal things. It's just getting crazy, isn't it, Andy? I mean, $83 million defamation judgment. How does this stuff? How can the system be taken seriously when it's so preposterous?
Yeah, I think the best way to look at it is in the first of these two trials, the issue of sexual assault was actually on the table for the jury to consider. And they found it, but they awarded $2 million for it and then looked at the defamation and said $3 million more. So it was $5 million. So you have a case where the allegedly horrific thing that happened was at issue. The jury found it was proved, at least to their satisfaction, on a low civil standard of proof, but gave a very modest award, which I think is testimony to the fact that it's a shaky story without a lot of factual support. Then you get to the second trial where sexual assault is not on the table. It's simply a question of damages for defamation, including one act of defamation that the jury actually considered but didn't have to vote on in the first trial, and it's $83 million. You don't even have like the sexual assault involved in the case, and it's $83 million. Very, I'd say impossible to square, but certainly very hard to square.
So what do you think happens there? We get asked that question a lot. Obviously, Trump could negotiate alongside of E. Jean Carroll's attorneys. Sometimes you see when somebody you well know, and for people out there who are not familiar, if a jury gives an outlandish verdict, a lot of times the two lawyers have already set a ceiling and a floor by which they say, hey, we're not going over this number, we're not going below this number. That obviously didn't happen here. Do you think they say, hey, we'll take $20 million, and Trump says, okay? Do you think the appeal just goes on forever? And I mean, Andy, from a pure legal perspective, here's what I can't get past, and I'm curious how you would analyze this, even leaving Trump aside. He was found liable for defamation based on, in the second trial, comments that he made in 2019 before there had been any verdict rendered in the first civil trial. So this, to me, feels almost like a floating defamation. He didn't deny the verdict of the first trial. It feels to me like the story is being reported as if Trump made comments, and I believe she sued on subsequent comments, right? And that's a different story. But I don't understand how you can defame someone for a trial verdict that hasn't happened yet. Does that make sense to you? It seems very wonky and wacky purely from a procedural perspective.
Well, it's procedurally confusing, Clay, because the 2019 defamation was tied up in appellate litigation over whether he had immunity for it because he made the statement while he was president. And here is where I think the court made an error that I think the appeals court is going to look very hard at, and that is Trump only wanted to have one trial here.
Yeah.
And Judge Kaplan insisted on having two. So I do fault Trump for not contesting the first trial because, look, if you're a defendant in a civil trial and you don't contest, it's not like a criminal trial. The jury gets told that they can draw an inference against you for not testifying, right? So you're almost assured if you don't participate to lose. And any good lawyer should have told him, look, if you lose here, in the next trial, they have this doctrine that's called collateral estoppel, and you won't be able to relitigate. He should have participated in the first trial. But that said, it should only have been one trial. And sure, maybe there would have been a second one anyway, because if he kept defaming her, she was going to keep suing him, and at some point there would have been a second trial. But it's really Kaplan's fault that there were two trials, and the result of how Trump handled it, he really didn't have a defense in the second trial. So it was like, I think this is like a human thing more than a legal thing. But I've always thought there's something really cathartic for a jury in finding someone guilty or finding against somebody on a civil tort. And the effect of that is to kind of depress the damages. Like you think that you've already struck a blow by saying the guy did it. And that has a moderating effect, I think, on damages. Whereas here, they didn't get to do that, this jury. The only way, if they decided Trump was in the wrong, the only way they could slam him was with damages, and they really did. And on your first question, I think this isn't a normal case. I think you're right that in a normal case, they probably negotiate an amount and like everybody goes home. But there's a political component to this, and because it's not a criminal case, Trump has to put up the money in order to appeal. He doesn't have to pay it to Carol, but they have to pay it into an escrow account. And I think part of what's going on here is if you think about this case and then you think about what's coming with this Judge Engoron decision when he gives whatever he's going to give on the civil fraud case where the state is asking for $370 million, that's going to tie up a lot of Trump. That's $500 million.
Yeah.
That's going to be tied up for a couple of years while he appeals.
Andy, and we haven't even gotten to the criminal stuff, and I want to spend more time with you on that too. But the civil stuff, it sounds like they're draining his resources and his time, and there's just also there's just the optics of going into court and this jury found against him and all this stuff. On the criminal side of things, though, what is the latest? I know we've talked to you about this a bunch. We always look at, it seems, first and foremost, the January 6th trial in D.C., because that's the one that could be the most politically damaging according to the polls. Does it look like that's going to happen?
Well, it looks to me like it can happen, Buck, until at least the summer. And then, to me, this is where I think I've been wrong all along. I've thought that it would be so unseemly to subject him to a 2 to 3 month criminal trial as it gets really close to the election, that there was like a certain date that if they couldn't start by like X date, they wouldn't start. I now think I was wrong about that because they've blown past every single norm you can imagine to get this guy. And I just think if it tees up that they can't get to trial until, say, mid-July or early August, I think they're so determined to get that case to trial, they would try to push it to trial, even though it's 2 to 3 months, and even though in criminal trials, unlike civil trials, the defendant has to be present every day. So, I hope I'm wrong about that, but I don't think anything would stop these guys if they thought they could get that case to trial.
Okay, so Andy, let's go into the time specifically, because this to me is the crux of maybe the 2024 campaign in general. Initially, they were going to try to start the Jack Smith case on March 4th. That's the day before Super Tuesday. There is 0% chance that that's going to happen, right? We're at February now. We've been saying on this show from the moment the Supreme Court took the case that dealt with half of the charges on January 6th, Supreme Court can wait until late June if they want to issue an opinion there. I think it would be very hard to start before the Supreme Court has ruled on that, to say nothing of the presidential powers argument, which is currently pending before the D.C. Circuit and has everything frozen there, right? Supreme Court can still take that up. Trump's going to appeal there. I now think that this New York City Alvin Bragg case may be the first to go to trial, and that the Jack Smith case may or may not end up happening. If you were setting the over-under, and I know this is complicated, I know we got 9 months until the election day basically sitting right now, how many cases do you think of these criminal nature are going to be able to be completed? I mean completed, jury, full verdict, before everybody officially votes. I think Election Day is November 5th, if I've got that right, for 2024. If you were setting an over-under right now, what would you make that number?
I'm still going to say 1. And the reason I'm going to say 1 is even though I think you're right that the Bragg case could get to trial, and that's a shorter one, maybe I'm fooling myself on this, but if I'm the Democrats, I don't want to start with that one.
I agree.
Because he could actually beat that case. So they haven't been.
And also, by the way, I think, I'm curious, Andy, sorry to cut you off. I think Buck and I have been talking about this on the show. I think a lot of people see all of these New York City cases as just kind of a big glob
Yep.
that's all connected, even though some of them are civil, some of them are business related, some of them are sexual assault related. I think most people are kind of discounting all the New York City cases. So I agree with you that if that starts, I don't think that really lands a punch because I think it's just kind of lost in the overall New York procedural shuffle. Do you agree on that front too? Not to mention the charges are less significant.
Yeah, I would put it this way, Clay. I think it's a no-lose for Trump and a potential bonanza. I think if he loses the case, exactly what you said is true. It just like goes into the ether. It's another New York jury that had it in for him, or whatever. But if he beats the case in Manhattan, which he could do because it's such a stupid case, that's going to discredit everything else in the lawfare campaign, and that would really be a coup for him, I think.
One
That's why I
other
don't
question
think
here.
they'll do it.
One other question that I haven't heard anybody else ask or talk about, and you're an expert, by the way. Good luck to your son in this. He plays for the University of Chicago, I believe. That's got to be amazing. Incredible school to have a kid at that supports free speech, by the way, and also to have a kid playing in college baseball. I'm sure you love going to those games. That's outstanding. And hopefully it helps to defray the pain of your Mets never having a chance to beat my Braves. But,
Right.
Andy, one thing that I'm not hearing anybody ask, I'm curious if you've thought about this at all. South Florida has been under the radar. What if South Florida decides to jump ahead of Jan 6 because they know the Supreme Court is not going to rule until probably June, and there are many different complexities there? Not as many, it doesn't seem, actual complexities with the South Florida case. That could keep the Jack Smith case that I think Democrats want to be the focal point, which is the one in D.C. Is it possible that there's too many moving parts now? And the Florida case is a serious challenge in terms of the facts for Trump, but I think the jury's very beneficial. I think the judge is very reasonable. That might last for months and box out the potential of there being charges brought and finished in D.C. Have you thought any about that angle?
I think that Smith made a strategic error with respect to that case, which will not allow for what you just laid out,
Okay.
which otherwise would be plausible. And that is, if you wanted to do that kind of fast and nasty and get it to trial, what you do is you leave the classified information counts out and you just do the obstruction case.
Okay.
And that I think he could have gotten to trial. The problem he has is he larded it up with like 36 classified information counts. And under CIPA, which is the Classified Information Procedures Act, all admissibility questions about classified information have to be litigated prior to trial, and there are appeals. So I think part of what's bogged that thing down is not only the ability to get access to the classified documents for discovery purposes, but also just the sheer breadth of trying to litigate all of the admissibility questions that could possibly come up bearing on classified information documents in the trial. It's going to be very hard. And I don't think the judge is pushing to get the case to trial. So it's going to be very hard to get that to trial.
Andy, you think Atlanta, sorry, we're really doing it around the world here of the legal stuff. You think Atlanta's just basically done? I mean, because of the prosecutor and the ethical issues and the whole thing. I mean, is that a non-issue, at least in terms of the election?
It's the hardest one to gauge because there's a lot of moving parts. Now the prosecutor's mired in scandal. She tried to do this big RICO thing to keep together what should have been a bunch of disparate little cases. And an overlay on this, Buck, is that Meadows is still litigating whether they can get the case transferred to federal court, which would basically start it all over again if that happens. And I still think he's got a good chance to win on that. So, I think that's a really tough one to gauge at this point. There's too much going on there.
Well, but I mean, the prosecutor's issues alone, is that enough that you think maybe just derails it? The fact that, I mean, she's got real problems.
Yeah, I think it may derail her participation in it more than it derails the case. But on the other hand, she's the one who pushed for the RICO. I mean, I think the RICO's preposterous. And these guys never committed, you can't conspire in the criminal law unless it's a conspiracy to violate a law. and trying to get an election reversed is not a crime. So that's not really the basis of a conspiracy. So she tried to paper over that by invoking RICO. But the truth of the matter is the only thing these 19 people ever did together was get indicted. Otherwise it's a bunch of disparate crimes committed by a lot of people, many of whom didn't even know each other or know what each other was doing. So if she's out of the case, I wonder if it lasts as a RICO as opposed to, look, the four people who pled guilty, none of them's pled guilty to the RICO, right? And then with respect to one of them, they had to make up, even though she has like this 140-page indictment or whatever it is, they had to come up with another crime to get this person out of the case because it wasn't, she couldn't plead to anything that was in the case. So it's a mess.
Andy, enjoy the game. Good luck to your son, University of Chicago's baseball season. And, man, as crazy as 2024 already is, I'm sure we're going to have you on a bunch of times breaking this all down for us. We appreciate the time.
Thanks, guys. Great to talk to you.
It's Andy McCarthy, Buck. He's as plugged in as anybody could be with all this lawfare that's going on. And, by the way, we'll take some of your calls if you have questions about this, because I do think it's now the most significant aspect of the Trump-Biden battle that we can't fully handicap because all the information's not out there.